Hello and welcome everybody to this Fabric Espresso. I'm joined here today by Philip, which means we're going to talk all about this fabric goodness. And today we've got a very specific topic for you. We're going to talk about shortcuts. But first, let me quickly show you how they fit into the fabric environment and into the scenario that we're building. As you can see here, we're actually starting to ingest some data into our OneLake, and also basically into our Fabric workspace. There's two ways of doing this: just loading that data in there, like using Azure Data Factory and data flows like you used to do. However, we've got all this existing data that we have from before, and we actually want to just tap into that data, and that's with something called a shortcut. So you can just create a shortcut, link it to a lakehouse, and start using it. And that's what Philip's going to show us. So, Philip, can you talk a bit more about shortcuts, just like the nitty-gritty things, like what do you need to set, and then just show us what it is?
Sure. Uh, OneLake shortcuts are objects that point to some other location. And you can create shortcuts in the lakehouses and the KQL databases. And also you can use them to point to arbitrary storage of yours in Azure or to the S3 Amazon storage. Let's see how we can do it. So here we have a Fabric Espresso workspace, and we will create a shortcut to external Azure storage. So we are going to a lakehouse. We mentioned that the shortcuts can be created in the lakehouses, and we will create it in a tables. Now it's important to make distinction between the tables and files. You can think of tables as a managed portion of your OneLake, and files are unmanaged. That means that in tables, you should create only shortcuts to formats that can be read by Trident, which is Delta at this moment. And any shortcut that you create here will be automatically discovered by your SQL endpoint. So not only it will be visible in Spark, you will be able to query it using SQL endpoint. So let's do it. For this, we will need URL. So we are moving to my storage. And here we can see that we have a storage with a container, with some structure, and there are few tables. I would like to be able to use Fabric to access this dimension users. So here we have a Delta table. And now when we create a shortcut, we'll actually use this table without copying the data. So no need to have a duplicate copies, to create ingestion pipelines, and so on. So let's do it. First, we need to copy the URL. And now we'll create a shortcut. Now, there are a few things to note here. I will pick Azure ADLS Storage Gen 2 as a type, but also you can create connections to Amazon S3 and Microsoft OneLake. Here, please note that when you use the URL, you need to use the DFS API and cut the rest. So basically just use the name. We'll create a new connection. Connections are used to store the credentials for accessing this storage. We'll create a name for this one. And there are different authentication methods. I will use the organizational account, meaning that my Microsoft account will be used to access the storage. So if everything works well, we will be able to move next. Perfect. And now we'll be able to specify where is the dim users table, which container and which folder. I will use the same path, but I will cut off the storage URL, and I left the list. So basically, this is a container, subfolder structure, and finally we have this folder dim users where the table is located. We need to use a shortcut name. So what happens now is that now in our storage, there is dim users table. So let's see what happens at the OneLake level using Azure Storage Explorer. In a previous video, we created this, we attached this OneLake to Azure Storage Explorer. So now let's explore it. I'll go to a lakehouse where we created a shortcut. We created a shortcut in the tables, and now we see a dim users. And now comes the fun thing. Basically, the data is not copied in your OneLake. It's just there is just a kind of a symbolic link called dim users that is pointing to the original storage location. But if I'm using a browser, I'm going to see the actual data. This doesn't mean that the data is copied locally to our OneLake. It's still in your original storage account. Now, as we have a shortcut in our lakehouse, we can use Spark to query it, or we can use a SQL endpoint. So I'll switch to SQL endpoint and use a SQL to query this table. The magic that happened in behind is that once we created a shortcut, Fabric recognized that there is a delta table on the other storage, and it was able to create the metadata required in a SQL to be able to access this data. So as you see, we can use SQL to query this data. This is a preview, and here we have just a regular SQL. So without copying the data, it's a single copy of your data. Without building any ingestion pipeline, we are able to query remote storages. Actually, any other storage that is not OneLake.
Awesome, Philip. That basically means that we can now just tap into that data that's residing on our previous data lakes and just load them, not really load them into our lake, but into our OneLake, but just access them. Now, what happens if I would go to that Source Explorer and maybe try to delete or alter that data? Is that possible?
So if you use, for example, Storage Explorer and open the folder for this shortcut and delete some data, first the Storage Explorer needs to make sure that you have a proper permissions. Obviously, you have a permissions to read the shortcut, but in order to delete files, you need to be able to have a proper delete permissions on the remote storage. So basically, if you have that permissions, you will be able to delete the file at the original location. But if you go to the UI of Fabric UI and just delete the shortcut, the original data will be intact. It will not be deleted.
Hey, great. Now, seems like an awesome feature to actually speed up and tapping into that existing data that you already have. Now, if this was the first time you're visiting our channel and you like this video, just give us a thumbs up. If you have any more questions about shortcuts or any other topics, just write them in the comments. And if you like more of this type of content, we've got loads of Fabric content, also signups content on this channel. Just hit that subscribe button and you'll have all of this Fabric goodness. As always, from the Signups Espresso team, this is Stijn and
Philip.
bye.